What I want to talk about in this video is also, of course, related to the Four Noble Truths. Basically, all of the Buddhist teachings are related in some way to the Four Noble Truths. It's a very sort of simple teaching that also has many sort of layers folded into it. I was trying to think of a visual metaphor. Maybe something will come to mind. But I want to talk more specifically about awakening and liberating the mind in everyday life. I'm a husband, I'm a teacher, I own a house, I am a father, I have a 2-year-old and another on the way. When I started this path 20 years ago, it was 1 year before I met my wife. We've been together a long time. And at that time, after my first awakening experience, I developed the intention to just wander off into the mountains and sit down and just abide in that bliss, and deepen it and deepen it and deepen it. That intention changed, of course, after I met my current wife. Like I said, we've been together since we were 16 years old, and that awakening experience was when I was 15. So since then, what I've been trying to develop is an understanding of how to incorporate awakening into daily life, which I think is important. These teachings came to us from monastic traditions, and a lot of the perspectives we have on them are monastic. And then even more importantly, what I've noticed is in the non-monastic Western Dhamma groups, what people call secular Buddhism or pragmatic Buddhism, and not going to name names, but not everybody falls into what I see as a developing issue, but they're losing sort of the core of what the monastic Sangha has preserved for the past 2,600 years, that has kept the core teachings intact, even though there's lots of stuff that was added. A lot, especially in the Theravada tradition, was kept intact. So what I see myself wanting to do is take I've spent the past 10 years associated with the Thai forest tradition. It actually began with an awakening experience, a second, I guess, however many, but another major awakening experience I had at Wat Suan Mok in southern Thailand. My wife and I were out there teaching English. And then since then, I've mostly been associated with Sanghas related to Ajahn Buddhadasa and the Thai forest tradition of Ajahn Chah, the Ajahn Chah lineage of the Thai forest tradition. And only recently have I discovered that there's a whole lot of lay Buddhists redefining awakening and liberation for profit, basically. At least that's how I perceive it. Maybe to help people, but there's also a profit motive there. All that kind of stuff motivated me to start making these videos, but really what I want to talk about in this video today is how to use the 3 characteristics, what's called the 3 characteristics, although Ajahn Jeff, I think, more appropriately translates it as the 3 perceptions of Dukkha, or actually it begins with Anicca, Dukkha, and Anatta. So Anicca translates as impermanence, usually transitoriness. Thai monks like to translate it as uncertainty, which works as well. Uncertainty is definitely related to our experience of dukkha. When we don't feel secure, we don't feel certain, we create fictions that make us feel secure, and that creates suffering. The second characteristic is dukkha, of course, the main characteristic of the First Noble Truth. That's any kind of disturbance or unsatisfactoriness. And what I'm going to talk about today is how that's not just a characteristic of an object, it's a perception that you adopt in order to become disenchanted by objects. And then the third characteristic is anatta, which is the perception of non-self, not seeing things as who and what you are, not seeing aspects of your experience of this body-mind complex, of this organism, as me, mine, or who I am. And then the Thai monks tend to translate that as non-controllability. The fact that you don't have control over something is a way of understanding that you don't own it. So these three qualities, and then when you take them together, they really equate to the experience or the perception of emptiness. When things are impermanent, unsatisfying, and not self, they are perceived as empty. Um, and I mentioned in the last video that things like impermanence and emptiness sound like negative things, but if you think about the way that children respond to bubbles, which are obviously empty and obviously impermanent, the perceptions of these things, emptiness and impermanent, actually can really delight the mind because it liberates the mind from its attachments. And there's nothing that feels better than being liberated from things that you attach to, especially because we are attaching to things in every moment and every breath, and we are very, very rarely fully present with our life. And then one of the things that triggered my first awakening was I saw myself as an old man on his deathbed, looking back at the moment I was in then, looking back at myself as a 15-year-old and just wishing and wishing and wishing as that old man in his deathbed to be that 15-year-old again. And then suddenly realizing that I was that 15-year-old and I was missing it. I was missing everything. And that I looked around at the people around me and I was realizing that most of us miss our entire lives. It's really quite sad. And why is that? Why do we miss our lives? Because we're intoxicated. I mentioned in the last video that you can think of the path of addiction recovery, the 12-step program, as probably the closest path that's in similarity to the Buddha's path. It begins with the perception of having a problem, right? And the Buddha's path begins with the perception of dukkha, is to see that the mind is intoxicated and that intoxication is a problem. So how do we use these three perceptions to wake up at every moment, or every time we remember to wake up? And that note about every time you remember, I got from Dhamma. You can find him online as well. He's a great teacher. It takes the pressure of feeling like you always need to be practicing. Well, you need to practice whenever you remember to. That's what he always points out. So let's look at Anicca first. Impermanence, transitoriness, the sort of changeful nature of things. This is the antidote to the misperception of permanence. So when we look at things as permanent, the mind grasps and holds on to them. We don't really want to grasp onto things that we know are fleeting. We don't want to identify with things that we think are fleeting. So when the self-feeling arises in the mind, it looks for the most stable object in nature to identify itself with, which is the body. It looks around at the objects the mind has fabricated in the world and sees them as solid and stable, and it grasps onto those. It grasps on to ideas of success, ideas of happiness. Anything that the mind can trick itself into seeing as solid and substantial and permanent, or at least semi-permanent, it's willing to grab onto because you know, the survival instinct after we're born, after birth, we go from this warm state of deep jhana in the womb, and then we're born into feeling cold, feeling scared, feeling hungry, feeling our senses are overwhelmed by light and sound, and we cry, and then we're put into our mother's arms, and we go back into that jhana, that feeling of safety, and we fluctuate between this feeling of security and insecurity throughout our lives. And as babies, we find security in our mothers and in their milk, in our swaddle, in our cribs. But the world is unstable. So what we do as a human society is we cluster together and we create narratives that we share that make the world seem to be stable, and we stay around the people that have the same narrative that we do in order to keep the world feeling stable. So let's say you have a certain cultural narrative or religious narrative that you believe in. You surround yourself with people who believe in that too. Even you look at high schools, you know, there's little tribes of people who have different value and belief systems. And they don't like people who have different ones. Why? Because it makes us feel insecure. It's that herding instinct. So not only is the body and physical objects seen as permanent, but belief systems are then seen as permanent, and all of these perceptions of permanence give us the illusion of security. But since that perception is based in illusion, it doesn't have any actual security to it. It doesn't have any actual stability to it. So we're deeply, deeply insecure. inside of ourselves due to this misperception. And that's actually that deep sense of insecurity is a very good translation of dukkha itself. As I mentioned before in the first video, dukkha is a metaphor. The word dukkha used to refer to a chariot wheel that didn't quite fit its axle, so it would be shaky, cause the whole chariot to be shaky. So that's insecurity, right? So that's just another way of looking at dukkha as a fundamental insecurity in the things that we personify, identify with, attach to, take on as me and mine, take on as satisfied. So dukkha is another perception. When we misperceive something as satisfying or as secure, we attach to it. And then, of course, we misperceive things as atta, as me, mine, or I. We attach to it as well. We take things to be mine. So if we could see things as they actually are, if we could apply these antidotes, these perceptual antidotes, we see things truly as unstable, as impermanent. We understand them to be insecure and not satisfying, and we understand them to not be who and what we are, then that equates to the perception of emptiness. These three characteristics together create a certain type of emptiness. In another video, I'll talk about the fundamental meaning of emptiness, which means empty of what's not there, and empty of the disturbance that depends on what's not there. There's different ways of looking at emptiness, but right now I'm talking about sort of the perception, the experience of emptiness, which I think could be better translated as freedom, actually. Freedom from the attachment that causes suffering. So when we perceive the things that we take to be permanent, satisfying, and who I am, when we perceive them as impermanent, unsatisfying, and not me or mine, we are able to release our attachment to them in the same way that the addict sees their drug of choice in that way and can release their attachment to that and take on the steps to recovery, the practice of recovery. We can use those perceptions to let go of the things that we attach ourselves to. I know this is easy for people to do with things that, well, not always easy, but we can see the value in doing this to things that bring us harm, obvious harm. But we can't always see the value in doing it to our core belief systems, which limit us in many ways. But I don't want to go down that road right now. What I want to sort of end this video with is just asking whoever's watching this to give it a try, to see sort of the insubstantial, empty nature of the things that you take to be satisfying, permanent, and aspects of yourself, and to see what happens when you take on those perceptions and see sort of the space, the third noble truth, that relief, that cessation, that's created when you perceive things in a more honest way. I'd like to end just with one example. Thoughts and emotions, we take these to be very personal, but if you're able to understand thoughts and emotions as just part of the process of nature, in the same way that we could perceive the weather as being a part of the process of nature, depersonalizing thoughts and emotions is very, very liberating. That's not to say that you don't see and experience them. That's not to say that they're not part of what adds sort of color to your life, if that's something you value. But not being sort of taken on a ride or swept up in a tornado by thoughts and emotions is very liberating. Just let the weather pass. Just let the weather be the weather. Just give it back to nature. It all comes back to being with Dhamma, which is just a way of saying allowing nature to flow by itself without taking it as who and what you are, taking it personally, adding judgment to it. Going back to the metaphor of the storm clouds, our ancestors used to look at developing storms as angry gods, and they developed all kinds of superstitious rites and rituals to try to control the weather to appease the gods. They would sacrifice animals, maybe even humans. They would perform all kinds of religious rituals. So that misperception caused a lot of fear and anxiety. It caused a lot of attachment to rites and rituals. It caused identification and personification, confusion about what to do. These are the three lower fetters I'm talking about. And then as we learned scientifically that the causes and conditions of a storm are just natural phenomena coming together at a certain time and place under certain atmospheric conditions, we no longer tried to control the weather with rites and rituals, fear and anxiety, personification and identification. So we were liberated from that misperception of what caused the weather. You can enjoy the same liberation from the natural conditions of the mind, natural arising and gathering of thoughts, of storylines, of emotions, and the tensions and the hormonal releases that are related to thoughts and feelings, adrenaline, cortisol, things like that. You can gain a lot of freedom from this biological process by applying wisdom at the point of contact. When a perception comes to the mind, instead of allowing all of the misperception and the habitual storylines to unfold, taking a pause, watching it unfold, seeing it in the same way you would see an unfolding process of nature, allowing it to be there all by itself, enjoying the gap that is created by allowing the weather to be the weather, allowing thoughts to be thoughts, emotions to be emotions, perceptions to be perceptions, feelings to be feelings, sensations to be sensations, allowing the body to be the body, and sort of just giving everything back to nature in every moment. If you have any questions about this topic, or if you have another topic you want me to address, just leave a comment or a question. Like and subscribe if you are willing to. I would love to respond to viewer comments in other videos. So thank you for watching, and I hope that some of this was helpful in bringing relief to any kind of unsatisfying experiences you may be having.